I'd like to introduce our poetic opener for the evening, Zoe Dickinson. Zoe is a poet and bookseller from Victoria, BC. Most of you probably know that. She has been published in literary journals such as Existere, Prairie Fire, and Contemporary Verse 2. Her first chapbook, Public Transit, was published in 2015 by Leaf Press, and her second chapbook, Intertidal Poems from the Littoral Zone, was a 2022 winner of the Raven Chapbooks Award. She is a manager here at Russell Books, and as you all well know, Zoe is the Artistic Director Emerita of the Planet Earth Poetry Reading Series. Please welcome Zoe.
Okay. That's a good boy. Hi guys on Zoom. For those of you on Zoom, I was just getting Duke to sit. He's up here with me. Thank you everyone for being here on such a cold and blustery evening. And thanks to everyone who made it on Zoom. That was possibly a smart way to do it. Hi, Angus. Okay, just gonna read some poems. The first poem I'm reading is from my chapbook, intertidal, and then the rest of the poems that I'm going to read are mainly about the bookstore, which is my current obsession, and one of my most beloved places. Nudibranch. Well, that's one way to deal with fear. Instead of getting harder, cast off the shell, become all soft underbelly. Expose every bit of glowing skin and dare the world to take a bite. What is armor but participation with the predator? Uncaged by calcium, flesh leaps like flame, canary, tangerine, violet, luminous cyan. Extravagant ruffles of serrata, so translucent, bits of digestive tract are visible inside. The nudibranch takes a hydroid into its mouth, gently, accepts the polyp's poison, saves explosive defense cells full of venom for later. Oh, noble sea lemon, cryptic nudibranch, dubious dorid, shag rug, moss landing aeolid. Oh, Spanish dancer, called inkspot, glaucus, clown, fuzzy oncodorus. Teach me to be soft and inexorable. For those who may not be familiar, a nudibranch is that. It's a sea slug, and you should definitely Google it because they're really cool. Where not to pick up chicks at a bookstore. The diet section. She doesn't want you to see her there, perfecting her disappearing act. Science fiction. Dreaming of a future that does not include you. Self-help. Mind the gap between the life she lives and what she thinks she deserves. Philosophy. Trust me, there are no good Heidegger-themed pickup lines. Quit being a waste of her time. Gardening. So many convenient places to hide a body. Romance. That's a lot to live up to. Do not approach unless you can guarantee happily ever after. Sherds. My resentment, a daily polished, daily shattered bowl, fragments of which will be found by archaeologists 100,000 years from now. They will be amazed any substance could be so frail, yet so dense. So I've worked at this bookstore for a decade-ish now. So it's really home for me. And I think it's a lot of things. This poem is called What It Isn't. The bookstore will not kiss your cheek, but it will ask about your day. It will not cook you dinner, but it will teach you how to cook dinner. The bookstore is not anyone's home, but at dusk, its windows are the same shade of yellow as the kitchen window in the house where you grew up. The bookstore has no roots or thorns, nor does it bear many globed fruit, but it contains multitudes of leaves, folded tight as spring buds waiting to open. It is not your friend, but it will introduce you to the love of your life. And speaking of the loves of your life, this poem is called Finding a Mate. It's another beachy one I forgot I threw in here. Finding a mate. Every morning we pass the same duck, a male, standing on the same log, staring out to sea, alone in the rain. But today, the first day I don't automatically grab my raincoat. Today, the first open air, green-breathed, blank page with no lines on it day. Today, 2 ducks. 2 pairs of webbed feet grasp the log's soggy arch. The female's herringbone brown wings folded primly. We both laugh with relief, and I grab your hand. We don't know it's the same duck, I say. And you say, let's choose to believe it is. And this poem is about the escalator, which I have been faithfully turning on and off tonight. And I do this every morning. The escalator. 1. Every morning I wake the captive god, kneel at its shining feet. Metal teeth grind to life, gnash fruitless round the same old track. Dormant beast, claws sheathed, Smaug in the heart of the mountain, fires banked, waiting for a riddle or a key. 2. It dreams of prowling the store, gouging faux wood floors. After dark, the escalator browses our romance section, shredding Nora Roberts with its sharp regard. When we don't bring in the latest Colleen Hoover, it sulks, refuses to turn on for a week. 3. You know when you stand at the edge of a cliff and can't help but imagine falling off in grisly detail. That's how I feel stepping on. I see myself pulled under, bones ironed flat, eyeballs popped, blood greasing the gears. I ride this thing 15 times a day at least, offer this small living sacrifice of fear. Okay, and this poem is the last poem I'm going to read, and it was inspired by a dream of one of my coworkers. I'm pretty sure they're all both current and former going to end up in this collection at some point. The dream. In Joanne's dream, I open a bookstore on a moving train. We hurtle over mountain passes while I sell Emily Dickenson to the Pevensey children on their way to boarding school. Susan rolls her eyes. Don't you have any rupee cower? Where's your book talk section? Lucy elbows her and says, we'll take it, thanks ever so. But Caspian's horn drags them off to Narnia, book in hand, before they can pay. Shoplifting is rampant, even in REM state. I recommend Thich Nhat Hanh to Tom Riddle, but all he wants is Nietzsche. I persist and sell him on Marcus Aurelius. He was an emperor, you know. And let's be real, this is my dream now, not Joanne's. And the train rushes on, engine room ablaze in my chest. Miss Marple asks for 50 Shades of Grey, and I can't unsee the twinkle in her eye as she says, you know, dear, this book reminds me of Letty Smith, the postmistress in St. Mary Mead. And the train rushes on between chasms furred with snowy trees, past the resort where I had my first job. 18-year-old me is standing by the trestle over Beaver Creek to watch us go by, her mouth sticky with unsaid words. And the train moves through moonlight and purple shadows, sliced straight-edged by lodgepole pines. Above, there are more stars than could possibly exist anywhere. Meanwhile, inside, I'm on the phone with TD to find out why the debit machine stopped working. What do you mean you can't send a technician to a moving vehicle? A line starts at the register as we slip off the tracks and barrel down into the Pacific Ocean. I ding the bell for help. Thank you.
Zoe, that was so fabulous. Wow, I can't wait till this book comes out. Our featured reader tonight is Cathy Stonehouse. And I'm so sorry. Cathy Stonehouse is a poet, writer, and visual artist who lives in East Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Tseil-Waututh, yep, Squamish, and Musqueam First Nations. They currently teach creative writing at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. Cathy has published a collection of short stories, a novel, and 3 collections of poetry. Grace Shiver was nominated for a Read Award. Dream House is their 3rd collection of poetry, and it's a long poem in 6 sections, I believe. Please welcome Cathy Stonehouse.
Thanks so much, Karen. Hello to everybody online. I recognize some of your beautiful names, and I also really appreciate everybody, all the beautiful faces in this room. Thank you so much for coming out on such a very cold night. It's just so cold out there. I'm incredibly glad that I actually made it. Wasn't sure if the ferries were going to cooperate. I just really appreciate this reading series. I was saying to Kieran, I actually read for this series many years ago. And it's just so fabulous that there's this community here, and that you meet every week, and that's been going for so long. And it was so beautiful to sit and hear everybody's poems. It was really touching. We should do more of this, sitting together and reading poems. I'm going to read to you from The Dream House. This is a slim volume, but the poems are quite dense. I feel like it's kind of, I can feel a weight when I hold it. So it's kind of deceptive in that way, which I guess a dream house should be. I won't take too long, but I just want to give you a little bit of context. So this book started when my mother, who I'm from the UK, and my mother, who was living there, she fell, a story that's going to be very familiar to many of us. She fell and ended up moving into a nursing home. So I had to go over there and, go through all of her belongings and kind of be in this home that was no longer her home, while she had been moved to a home that didn't feel like a home. And it just got me thinking about homes and houses and spaces, and also how I feel like poems and language have been a home for me throughout my life, and how poems can create, or the imagination can create its own space inside. So I was playing with those ideas. Yes, it is kind of a long poem in that it's a long sequence, and the poems can really be best appreciated read in order, although they are in some ways like distinctive sequences. So we ended up calling it a poem, although it was either poems or a poem for quite a long time, but we fell down on the side of the poem. So the first one I'm going to read is the first poem in the book, which was actually the last poem that I wrote. I wanted something that was kind of an entrance into the house, an entrance into the book. So the poem really describes in a very compressed way My own journey, when I would go and visit my mother in the nursing home, I would take a plane, then take a train, then I would take a bus. I would get off the bus, I would walk through this little streets and enter the nursing home, you know, which is like going into another universe. And so that's kind of what this poem talks about. So it's doesn't have a title, but the first line is describing an actual road called Doreen Avenue that I used to pass. And I used to have the fantasy that Doreen was a person, and I was always very kind of comforted by her presence somehow. So I'll read you this first poem. Doreen Avenue, soft rooks, ceramic dogs in the windows, the burnt dust World War II rattle of a sleep-smeared number 91 bus. One turn, another, and then another into the eerie greenness of a cul-de-sac. Hanging basket, 4-digit key code, cry for help, daytime TV, smell of lost worlds melting into their simplest elements. Your brief signature pressed into this perfectly bound visitor's book. Sugar, phosphates, gold rings, surnames, breath. Okay. So I'm not going to read from, I'm going to try to dip into each section. I was going to time myself and I totally forgot. I don't do that now. So the next section is called The Long Rooms. So this is, this takes us into the home, but it's really going into my mother's kind of internal rooms, really. So it's quite surreal. And in fact, this whole book is quite surreal because the whole experience is very surreal. So I'm really trying to get at the kind of strange juxtapositions of things that happen or that you find. And there's a dreamlike quality, obviously, to the poems. And although they're full of a lot of detail that a lot of which is personal, I feel my hope is that by entering these poems, it's like being in a dream where you get fragments of narrative or little pieces of things you recognize and you start to put them together, but you're not quite sure how they fit together, because that's the kind of experience I wanted to evoke. So I'll read in the long rooms. In the home that is not her home, your mother has draped herself in a flowers of the Cotswolds tea towel, behind which white-boned birds rise from the cliff tops of her marriage to a psychopath. Outside, museum leaflets flutter past, Costa coffee lids, flamingos and vultures drift along silent corridors. Inside, your mother closes her blue eyes on the future. Custard congeals into yellow pellets while nurses offer ointment to smear on her lesions, the wrong sort. Inside, there are long rooms, empty, full of the shells of older women. Girls in leather sandals running for the tram, a gloved hand attached to a mask, which isn't for her, but passes through her like a memory of the sun or a man dancing on a restaurant table. Inside, there are rooms overlooking High Street, where your mother has seated herself at a grimy window, ready to perform for the stalled passengers. A scene from Hay Fever. Her black nylon negligee tied with a scarlet cummerbund. Someday soon, someone will recognize her potential and upgrade her cabin to one with a view of the sea, a round window through which rafts of migrants might be visible. There are no doorways into the long rooms. They echo instead with the rattle of distant theme tunes, a pair of kitchen curtains sewn into a bloodless grandmother, Delia Smith's recipe for risotto verde, hallways that connect arm to body, soul to head. In those days, the boys played tennis while I sat quietly beside mother and father slept beneath his horse on the southern frontier. We all ran through the emptied rooms when the adults went drinking. tried out voices until one spoke, projected me all the way into John Carpenter Street. I was everyone then, Antigone, Rosalind, Sonia, Abigail, one skirt on, one in the wash. Then the letter arrived just after I'd left, returned to our one room to take my turn sleeping beside the closed piano. That bright voice we couldn't get rid of. Mother kept her saucepans on its lid. The story behind some of that is that my mother, she actually went to drama. She grew up in a pub, and she managed to get a scholarship to go to drama school and wanted to act. That was her great dream. My grandfather wasn't very good at managing money. He went bankrupt. They lost the pub, and they did end up living in one room, and they did end up sleeping beside the piano. So that's actually that surreal detail is actually taken from life, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so the next section, just wondering how I'm doing for time. The next section, I go back in time to my grandmother, and I'm evoking my grandmother's council house and her world. Maybe I'll read that one too, and then I'll move into the dream house section, which is the real heart of the book. In the doorway of her council house, your grandmother pins flowers to her sun hat, dons cracked white painted shoes and a nice gray mac to wear on her walk up the hill. So very invigorating, she returns years after she leaves, a crusted milk pan empty beside ant-ridden sugar, an only twice used tea bag drying on the radiator, back door open to a waist-high forest of weeds. How close the world feels, and yet it lags so far behind. That lone boy's voice rising between stone pillars, one long last breath and then another, no pause between. Your grandmother crochets parachutes in the sitting room where two dead sons and a sister smile down from the mantelpiece. In her apron pocket, the one she wore at the cafe the day you met, a recipe for trifle. Whipping cream, glacé cherries, sliced bananas, sherry, and ratafia biscuits. A small room with a narrow bed in which an angel presses ice to its forehead. A dining set rotting beneath tarpaulin, and so many whispering nettles alive in the shadows, it's as if she's turned on the radio. And Her Mother Came Too by Ivor Novello. Then a long sweep back like a river of grain in reverse. Almost threshing time, and the men walk out in a line toward the sunset. Almost threshing time, and the women run their fingers over the stoneware, each lip of pure cold over which cider comes. Yeah, my grandmother's people were farmers, so that's part of what you get there. So the next section is the longest section, the section called Dream House. This was the first section that I wrote, and the rest of the book kind of cohered around it. So I've already given you kind of the context for this. I'm just going to check my notes here because I decided which ones to read. Yeah. Okay. So I guess part of what another theme in the book really is this idea that it's kind of the matrilineal line in my family, like my grandmother, my mother, myself, and eventually my daughter comes into the picture. And so part of the idea is thinking about how, most of the time, I don't want to overly generalize, but that women end up being the ones who are responsible for making the home or holding the home or creating a sense of home, and also kind of having this internal or domestic space that's kind of pulled back from the public view. And so there's that kind of idea of different kinds of space, and what it means to take care of that space and, you know, the hauntedness of those kinds of spaces. Okay, enough blabbing. Let me read. Open the door, cross the threshold. Stairs rise up like tides. Drowned songs sway across the landing. Down here, your abandoned skin still breathes, an unseen spider quivering on a web. You are home. You are not at home. A plant which is not alive, a wild flower trapped in a frame. What is the price of this cocoon? How may it be dismantled? Its eggs dead, its larvae desiccated into paper models. This is how life was once lived. A room full of women weaving lies into capes, a mechanical contraption for slicing eggs, the rudiments of interspecies conception unwinding inside a battered Sony cassette deck. Your old thoughts laid end to end along the skirting boards, eaten into by ants and ghosts. To go home is no longer possible. The church you prayed in, playground you swung in, prison you broke from lie empty, converted anachronisms. By taking off your fingers, open the lock. Maple syrup cookies, Scotty dog shortbreads, shit-stained tiles. Touch nothing, inhale nothing. To go home, unzip the mouth of your suitcase. A flaming pair of gloves flies out. Okay. Okay, a couple more and then I'll skip a little bit. Inside you, there is the Pacific Ocean. There is also the Andromeda Galaxy, a strange ring galaxy, and a small Magellanic Cloud. Below them is fresh air and the constant relief of not being confined. Inside you, an empty coracle sits on a bed of moss. Beside it, a sheep crops turf, while in the background can be heard yodeling. Inside, caribou migrate for weeks across a tundra which stares up at the dark side of the moon. Inside, there is the hole up which the poet places her hand. What are you doing? It asks. Can a hole talk? Because there are lakes in here that have never seen bottom. Eohippi that decline to become horses and janitors who've never opened a broom closet, which is a good thing because opening broom closets leads to turbulent flow. Okay, Eohippi are actually the ancient ancestors of horses, in case you didn't know that. Okay. Yeah. Okay, this one was a very brutal moment. It's dark humor, but it's kind of how it was. What matters when conjugating absence is to separate present from past. The first obstacle to eliminate, her handwritten thesis, its perfect spelling matters not. Next, pixelated crenellations, her holiday snaps from Spain, Mallorca, Bermuda, Switzerland, and again Spain. Tasting blood, you flick through her Let's pocket diaries, aged 13 to 83, exterminate, exterminate. No one can read her copperplate handwriting, and who cares how she felt about the sunset on December 22nd, 1963. Next, unfinished paintings. Spanish dances in acrylics, moored boats in water. Most are bad, and those which are good aren't good enough. All the brushes, plus the adult diapers, unsent letters to the county council, creased up programs for ballets, and the labeled remains of her final middle-aged love affair, which ended in his marriage to someone else. What matters when transcribing are the elisions. Here is where some words fell out because they were considered by the transcriber irrelevant. A lock of your baby hair, that fractured clavicle, her recipe for pineapple upside-down pudding. In other news, hundreds of bleached blondes in 1980s tracksuits have been condemned to death. There is a comfort in the night, which arrives like a slowly accumulating precipitate, always darkest nearest the ground. These days, it extinguishes color quickly, plunges red like hot glass into black. After blue, there is no comparison. You crawl along the landing in your nightdress, try not to notice the bad breath of other poets beside you. Stripped of their names, they are voiceless, yet secretly relieved. Okay. I'll just read a couple more from this section. Where are you now, and how do you picture their fortitude? Scarfell Pike, circa 1972, a woman in a hot pink blouse and a man in beige slacks, carrying on an argument about Schopenhauer. Their dream was of escape, but they bought a prison just big enough to qualify as a marriage. In each window placed an oil lamp, and at night glued rustic cottages out of matchsticks, little shrines while hope knitted up the dark. And when they died, were only inches from the perimeter, that line where a lone dog circles, hungry for body parts, the soft spot under the ear where kindness collects. Okay, so maybe I will move on from that section. As you can see, it kind of toggles between kind of the past, the present, and past that never really happened, but might have. So there's three more sections. I'll move through these a little more quickly. The next one, Boxes, Nests, really digs into this idea of the poem as a kind of house, and the house I grew up in, and also the sense of history in the area that I grew up in, which feels like another kind of haunting. There's definitely a theme of haunting here. I'll just read one poem from this section. There must be a something that belongs in the walls of a poem, a charm or a curse made of satin, a dormant egg. Walls are here, as are windows, symbolized by the dot on the top of each eye. The poet wears battered sealskin. She has not been a heron or a hero, although her and he live together and apart in entangled mutuality beneath stone cavities. Word sparks flit through the shadows between their fixed margins. Catharsis does not occur here, only star lives. Sidereal crawl space, who is it, shines forth? Celtic kings and queens wearing twisted gold chokers, wild boar from neurologic forests. The 1970s shag pile covers them up, and yet we hear them. This poem, with its open plan feudalism, anchorites serving hatches, enclosed mytho-commons punctuated by priest holes, this poem holds many eyes coded into its walls. I'll just read this one. The robin has a cheerful eye. His feathers hold between them the air bones of March, warmth and wind, a scourging sky. His rust jacket flutters. Pain is about, sings Winter Robin. Beware the merry gentleman in his brown tweed thoughts, the farmer or the blacksmith with rage on his breath. The wren, a small brown tailwind on a bicycle, sprightly yet unsightly, up and down the spindrift alley, lifting her pale, rugged eyebrows, spreading the unbroken news. An unwound wristwatch, an egg on a twiggy little beer. When does spring come, and how will we know when it is here? This, children, is a poem about British birds and their nests. I have tried to tell you a little about each bird so that you will know where and how they live. But the great thing is to know what the bird is when you see it. And you can only do that by watching and keeping your eyes open. Okay, I'm just going to read a couple poems before I close from the next section, which is actually a section, it's called As of a House Walking, and it's actually about the experience of pregnancy, which feels like being a house that's walking around, basically. So, you know, it's this thought of the home inside the body, that's our first home, you know, the kind of dreaminess and the kind of liminality of that time when you're waiting for things, but things that aren't happening. My daughter was 2 weeks late, so I had this, you know, I'm sure there's people in the room that can relate when you're sort of in this weird time stops and you're just waiting for something, but you don't want to, you have to sort of not think about it, but you know that it's going to happen. I just really, it's taken me a long time to be able to go back to that experience and try to write about it. And I wanted to write about it without really naming it. Like I'm trying to write about the experience from the inside, from how it feels, rather than what the outside world would say about it. So I'll just read a couple of those. In private, when no one is watching, you're nothing, a flesh balloon filling up with thoughts. There is too much within, not enough air, and an urgency during which nothing happens, like those decades when only a year passes. This one filled with bombings you neither see nor hear, and the beginnings and endings of lives you never agreed to. George Bush Jr., the children who disappeared on Knowledge Day. Where does a figure 8 begin? How do you step into the stillness of a lazy river? In private, her neural tube has closed after picking up the stitches of older sisters. In public, you wear a green cotton blouse, the shy color of early basil. New roses jump at your every step. This is the way, they tell you, out of the ice box. Not the slow dance of fire, but a coup d'etat. To be an opening through which light comes. To control the angle of this light. To focus its intensity upon her face. To be the matter through which light passes. And for there to be no light without this body. To carry around a lens inside the pelvis, not to see, but to bring forth what can't be seen. A trout leapt free, her body bashes, righteous shocked against your blood-strung belly, quiets into the thrum of time's compression, gravity pressed, pliable, a soft clock. The before time not yet severed, but abating, rising and falling with the pulse in her fontanelle. To be a passage, dangerous and fraught. To be an instrument of the long dark. Closing up now like a sea anemone at the press, its slow furling inward of mouth, a hidden throat stroked as electric light touches her irises, their melanosomes still heaven swept. The brown, not yet separate from the blue. I think I will stop at that point. Okay, thank you so much. Anybody has questions, you can ask me after, I guess. There are some books for sale, so thank you so much for listening, and thank you to everybody online for being there. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure to have this chance to read. Thank you.